My father shattered my dreams to protect his golden child and later refused to pay for my tuition. I am 32 years old and have a 28-year-old brother, both raised by our 56-year-old father. Ever since middle school, my father has always favored my brother, and I gradually got used to it. I was never the son my father wanted because I wasn't interested in sports or typical masculine activities like him. I always preferred activities that were considered feminine, which is why I became my mother's darling when I was young. I loved everything in the kitchen, reading books, and even singing. My father tried to get me to play football with him, but I wasn't good at it, so we gradually grew apart. On the other hand, my brother was exactly the kind of son my father wanted. He was a rugged and tough boy, unafraid to get dirty or injured while playing. He was the perfect son in my father's eyes, and it was clear that my father loved him more than me. He always praised my brother but never did the same for me. My mother never favored either of us, she was fair to both, which is why I loved her more. I did try to build a friendship with my father and spend time with him, but once we grew apart, he didn't seem eager to mend our relationship. Unfortunately, the glue that held our chaotic family together, my mother, passed away when I was in 8th grade. She had been fighting cancer, and by the time we realized it was too late to save her, she left before we knew it. My mother's death left me heartbroken, and I was a bit out of control during that time. My only solace was the kitchen. I would make something new every day as if my life depended on it. My mother was an excellent cook and often told me that she might have become a chef if she hadn't been forced to take over her father's business, so cooking was my only emotional comfort because my father and brother were of no help in dealing with my feelings. They suppressed any emotional response to my mother's death, and if anything, they distanced themselves even more from me. In a normal family, such a thing should have brought us closer, but my obsession with cooking only annoyed my father more, and he always urged me to leave the damn kitchen and do something more masculine. One day, when he had enough, he even told me that if he saw me in the kitchen again, he would make me do all the housework. He told me to be more like my brother and act more like a man, which eventually led to a big argument, and I told him he never loved me, and he agreed. Finally, everything was out in the open, and I guess this was almost the last time I spoke so frankly with my father because afterward, I stopped trying to win his approval, and he didn't seem to care. In the following years, I spent all my time in my room listening to music and learning new recipes. I was determined to make this chef thing work, not only for myself but also for my mother. Meanwhile, I only talked to my father when absolutely necessary. My brother also didn't care much about me, just like our father, ignoring me. So after my mother passed away, I basically had no one to rely on. Finally, when I applied for college, I decided to apply to some top culinary schools and regular universities so that I at least had a chance. I didn't know if my father would agree, but I had to try. At least I had secretly interned at a restaurant that summer, had some experience, and managed to get them to write me a recommendation letter, which helped a lot, so I was eventually accepted by some of the schools I applied to, including the best one, which happened to be in France. I was very excited that this was finally happening, but I was also quite nervous because it would mean having to ask my father for permission. I had made up my mind that if he seemed hesitant, I would plead with him to let me go because I absolutely had to do this for myself. Under no circumstances was I ready to give up on my dream. So, I finally told my father, and although I was prepared for him to refuse my request, saying it was not a masculine profession, I was completely unprepared for him to refuse to pay for my tuition. I still remember being very confused when he told me that he would not pay for my education at all because my father was not poor. In fact, he was quite wealthy and could easily send me to France. But money was not the reason he was unwilling to pay for my tuition, it was that if I went to France and joined such a prestigious school, my brother would feel insecure. Because his grades had been slipping, and he couldn't focus, so my father wanted me to either go to a community college or find my own way to pay for my tuition. I was shocked that he would do such a cruel thing to his own son and didn't know what to say to him. I tried to tell him that I needed this, but he was adamant and absolutely unwilling to pay for my tuition. He even told me that my brother's well-being was his top priority, and he didn't want me to compete with his son. I could hardly believe that all this was happening because I couldn't imagine any other father in the world shattering their child's dreams just to favor their favorite person. After much pleading and crying, and when he still refused to give in, I eventually had a big fight with him, said a lot of things to him, and left his house forever. I started living with my mother's sister, my aunt. The only reason I didn't move out earlier was that I found comfort in the house where I grew up with my mom, and I didn't want to change schools because if I moved to my aunt's, I would have to change schools because she lived far away from the high school I attended. I told her all about my father and how he flatly refused to pay for my tuition, and I needed her help. It felt bad to ask her for a lot of money because she wasn't as wealthy as my father, but she promised me that she would take care of all my expenses in some way. She managed to get all her friends involved and sent me to my dream culinary school, for which I will always be grateful. Once I got there, I also worked part-time and tried to make the most of my time there to make all the money spent on me worth it. I worked very, very hard, and when I graduated, I was one of the most skilled chefs there, and even found a job within a few months after graduation. I started working at a very high-end French restaurant, and I sent half of my salary back to my aunt to repay any debts I owed. Gradually, I was lucky enough not to have to rely on student loans, or I might never be able to repay it. I worked in France for a few years and finally saved enough money to return home and open my own restaurant. It has been a few years, and during this time, I worked as a head chef at another restaurant here while also striving to achieve my goal of opening my own restaurant. A few weeks ago, everything finally fell into place, and I was finally able to open the restaurant I had been working towards for so long. Two of my friends from France also joined my business idea and became my co-owners, which is why I am grateful that they allowed me to choose the name of our restaurant. They happen to be from the same state, so we all agreed to open our restaurant in our city. I chose to name it after my mother, which was a very fortunate coincidence for us because my mother actually had a very beautiful and unusual name in the city we call home. A few days ago, everything finally came together, and we even held a small party for some selected guests before the official opening. I of course invited my aunt and some of her friends who also helped pay for my tuition. I also invited some friends from school, but that was it. I did not invite my father and brother for obvious reasons. Even though I wanted to, I couldn't because I hadn't spoken to them since I left home, and they had not contacted me. I think we are all better off this way, but I should have known that they would come to take advantage of my success one day, which is exactly what happened at the party. They arrived an hour early to the party, but the security guard did not stop them because we have the same last name, and they claimed they were there to surprise me. At least that part was true. I was indeed surprised when I saw them. My father and brother greeted me as if nothing bad had ever happened in the past, and they were very warm to me, which may have been the first time in my life. I was shocked to see them, so when they first entered the restaurant, I just froze. My guys noticed something was wrong, and after politely greeting my family, they left us alone, and I thanked them for sensing my discomfort. I hadn't recovered from the shock of seeing them again when they threw another bomb at me by showing me the gift they brought for me, and I was even more shocked. It was a portrait of my mother, and my father even told me that he had commissioned the painting for me to hang in my restaurant, and when he heard about a new high-end restaurant opening in our city with a familiar name, he knew it was definitely his son. He even told me that he had always known I had the ability. My brother was also following suit, praising me and telling me how proud he was of me. I couldn't believe my ears and immediately knew that all this was very strange. I didn't say much, just waiting for them to say why they were here because I knew they must have a reason. I let them talk, and eventually, they did say why they were here. Apparently, my brother is now a bartender, which could even happen just because my father managed to persuade his friends to give him a job at his club. My brother's grades have been declining throughout high school and college, which is why he didn't achieve the high-paying position my father always expected of him. In addition, he also slacked off in high school football games, which is why he also couldn't get a sports scholarship. Ironically, he was the one who had to go to a community college because he was rejected everywhere. What they wanted me to do was to make my brother a partner in the business so that he would have a more decent status, even though he didn't do anything to deserve it. I had the urge to laugh at them to their faces, but somehow managed to hold back and told them I would consider it. I won't consider it, I just didn't want to turn them away. I wanted them to stay for the party because I had a better plan to humiliate the family who came out of the woodwork as soon as they heard about my success. They seemed quite satisfied, but God, they had no idea what was coming next. After a while, our guests began to arrive, and about an hour later, everyone we invited was there. I spent the evening socializing, and my father and brother did the same, and I even heard them bragging about me to some people while being surprised at their audacity. At the end of the party, it was time for the hosts, me and my partners, to make a toast. My friends spoke first because I wanted to save the best for last. Then it was my turn to speak. On that day, I was finally going to speak my mind. I first thanked all the guests and made a toast to my mother because she was the reason I was able to achieve so much. I firmly believe that it was her trust in me when I was a child that made me believe I could do all this, and even after she left, that trust has always been with me. After I paid the proper respect, I decided to also pay homage to Di. I mentioned that I had to borrow money from my aunt and her friends to go to culinary school and thanked her. Then, I finally talked about the original reason I had to borrow money for tuition, my family. I told everyone how I grew up with a father who never loved me or believed in me, always belittling my interests in cooking and other feminine pursuits, and a brother who was a carbon copy of my father. I told everyone that my father refused to pay for my tuition because he was worried I would be more successful than my brother, his golden child, which is why I eventually left home. But despite all the difficulties, I was able to rise and become who I am today, so in a sense, they should indeed get some credit for creating all the difficulties I faced, or I would never have discovered how resilient I am. As I said this, many people gave my father and brother the most disgusted looks they could muster, even though they at least seemed a little ashamed, even though I knew they didn't really think so. Then, I walked up to my father and brother, actually hugged them, pretending just like they did when they came to see me today. I announced that because they came to celebrate my success today, I had forgiven everything that had happened in the past, and was even ready to make my brother the bartender at my restaurant. To everyone else, it obviously looked like a very touching reconciliation, and they even applauded me in the end. There were a few whistles at the end of the speech. Only my family and I knew that this was just a way to humiliate them, and I did it very successfully. But they had to smile and act very grateful for what I did because they couldn't storm out angrily, which is exactly what they wanted to do. After a while, the crowd dispersed, and it was finally time for us to go home. My father and brother confronted me outside my restaurant. They were very angry, and I swear there were angry tears in my brother's eyes. They demanded an explanation for what I had done, and if I never intended to make my brother a partner, then I should have turned them away when they arrived. I just laughed and told them this was my form of repayment for everything they had done to me over the years, and this was what they deserved. Then, I walked away without even looking back, even though I heard my brother crying, saying this was the cruelest thing, and even shouting behind me that I would regret it. But I didn't care because I was already in the car, driving away. That was a few days ago, and I haven't heard from them since. My aunt thinks I may have been a bit too harsh and should have turned them away from the start, but I disagree with her. This was the humiliation they deserved. Update 1. Hey, despite my aunt saying I was too harsh, I decided not to contact my family to apologize. I have no regrets about what I did, so I won't pretend to have any, nor will I go out of my way to say it. They could have apologized to me when they visited, but they didn't. I also explained this to my aunt, and although she still thinks I shouldn't have done what I did, she didn't say anything more. I think this is just one of the areas where we agree to disagree, and I'm fine with that. In addition, my brother has made sure to say all the bad things about our friends from school behind my back. Unfortunately, we went to the same high school, which means strangers from the school are now texting, confirming rumors that I humiliated and deliberately fed my father and brother old food for 3 days, then kicked them out of my restaurant. Yes, he exaggerated the story to make himself look like a victim, which is not surprising. Generally, I wouldn't care about small rumors, but I don't want potential customers to take these rumors seriously, so I texted my brother that if he doesn't stop spreading lies about me at my restaurant, I'll make sure he loses his current job. 2. I hope this works because I really don't want to deal with their unnecessary nonsense now. I'm very busy with work, and this is not the time. Update to haha, my brother texted back saying he would only stop if I made him a partner. I don't even understand what level of stupidity and delusion this is. Moreover, if he wants to be a partner, isn't he talking nonsense about the same restaurant? Isn't that a rather stupid idea? I'm sure this is my father's strategy to ensure his darling son gets a high-profile job without doing any actual work, but unfortunately, it doesn't work for me. I told him that if he doesn't stop, he will hear from my lawyer, and he is not qualified to negotiate with me at all. The only reason I haven't done anything yet is that I don't want to get involved in unnecessary drama, but if he tries anything funny, I will definitely mess him up, and he should take this as my final warning. I really hope he does this for his own good. Update 3. So, it's been about a month since the last update because I've been very busy, and I haven't told you what happened after that. My brother did stop talking bad about me behind my back, but they are still very eager to join my success, so my father decided to visit me with my brother a few weeks ago, just to intimidate me. They showed up at my house, threatening to sue me for using my mother's name as my restaurant, and even told me they had already talked to a lawyer. So if I don't want any trouble, I need to make my brother a partner as soon as possible. Obviously, I immediately saw through their bluff because no lawyer would take on such a stupid case. I think they forgot a very important fact: she is also my mother, not just his wife. As far as I'm concerned, no law can stop me from using her name. At that time, I had enough of their nonsense, so I told them that if they didn't leave me alone, they would force me to take action, and I would have to call the police. My brother lost his temper at that time and tried to grab my collar, but fortunately, my father stopped him. I think it was the constant humiliation that finally made him break down. Well, it's not my fault, and they are lucky I didn't call the police immediately. I told my father he needed to leave me alone right away, but he only told my brother to go to the car and calm down. He wanted to talk to me privately. After my brother left, he tried to manipulate me, telling me that if my mother knew what I was doing to them, she would be very sad, and I should reconcile. At this point, I told him to leave me alone because even I had reached my limit. He can't just use my mother to achieve his purposes, which is very low. Honestly, we have long passed the point of reconciliation. They haven't even apologized to me once, so I really don't understand why they expect me to forgive them without asking. As for what my mother would feel, I believe she would be just as disappointed as my father for refusing to pay for my tuition. In fact, every time he made me feel bad, she would be disappointed. So he should be the last person to lecture me about what my mother would like and dislike. I know she is proud of me everywhere, and nothing my father says will change that. At least my restaurant is doing well, and I hope we can expand soon.